So at the end of the day, people need to know, I think, what their liabilities are. I think one of the things that, if anything, is going to help you, the issues of possession of a firearm while committing a felony is the charge. So the idea is that there's got to be some kind of the concept is possession. Now the concept of possession can be both actual possession, which is I'm holding this,
which is what it was meant to
this
be.
mouse
meant
right
to
this
say.
actual
That's what
possession.
it should say.
Actual possession. Then I also have a mouse at home.
Yeah, locked away.
Someplace that's
5
mine.
miles from here.
It's not my kids, it's not my wife's, and I'm possessing that. That's called constructive possession. So this concept of possession of something that you're not physically in control of, and some marijuana behavior, which may not even be physically controlled, but it's deemed as being illegal or felonious, and you've got two constructive possessions of stuff where you're not even in physical control, and a conclusion or an allegation that you are using both, or using the gun in the commission of the felony. I mean, I'm talking about a scenario where you're not even home, and they raid your house, and they got to grow, and they find a gun, and you're charged with
and you're going
being
to prison.
a felon in possession of a firearm, committing
The
a felony.
prosecutors have been selling it to the
Oh, yeah.
judges for
Yeah.
years, Michael, and those judges have been buying it all along, and it's ridiculous.
But the language and the associated facts usually revolve around the accessibility to the two contraband behaviors. So if you're going to have your gun in your bedroom, best to not have marijuana in your bedroom. If you're going to have your gun under the couch or someplace that's accessible for the front door, you want to have your plants locked away anyways. It's always the best advice. Separating them, I mean, the more you separate, the more you make it inaccessible to you, the less available it is for need when you for purposes of. So it's a very fine line. I think people need to know what their liabilities are, and with all that in mind, there will be a test case at some point, I'm sure, unfortunately, and but I don't know that the enforcement level is there. I think if they're involved and engaged in other illegal activity, and there's a gun there, they're going to try to stick that on you. It goes that simple. But other than that, if you're in statewide compliance, I think you have less to worry about. Although, just because marijuana is still Schedule 1, I think people need to be aware of that.
But
Alan and Jeff, can I have a second or third opinion? Where's Allie? Alan, what do you say? You got any thoughts on that?
No, I think you've accurately stated the law.
Yeah. I think it's important to clarify for people that if they lose, if they're charged with felony firearm and they lose, they're going to prison for 2 years.
Felony firearm is a terrible, terrible offense. It is on its own a very confusing jury instruction. Now, you have to understand, in order to charge someone with felony firearm, which is a crime that, if you understand what I'm saying, could never be charged alone. Felony firearm is using a firearm in the commission of another crime that's a felony, okay? So you're never going to see felony firearm charged alone. There's always a underlying felony that someone was using their firearm and committing. And the most outrageous part about the felony firearm is if you are convicted of it, it's a mandatory 2 years in prison. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Mandatory 2 years in prison, and it will run consecutive to the probation you may get for your underlying felony. Now, I just explained that you'll never see a crime charged felony firearm alone. There'll always be an underlying felony. However, the jury instruction reads that to find the defendant guilty of felony firearm, you must conclude that the defendant committed, not convicted of. So the jury doesn't need to, and prosecutors will argue, you don't need to convict him. You can just find him guilty because he committed the marijuana, he committed this crime, not even convicted him. And you find verdicts that result in a felony firearm alone. How can that be when you have to have an underlying felony, but it's just that you committed? So what I'm saying to you is that you get in situations where it would seem illogical that someone could be convicted of just felony firearm. Juries oftentimes will split the baby if it's a contested case. They don't know, the prosecutor did a good job, I feel bad for her and him. Defense said, okay, it seems like a nice guy. We'll just come up with this felony firearm, having no idea that it's a mandatory 2 years in prison. Mm-hmm. Judge, in that situation, has to sentence the person to 2 years in prison. That's what Jim's talking about, and that is one of the really difficult parts about this felony firearm crime. It has been abused. I think the most classic scenario that it was began being used for was it in the era of other prohibition, but say crack and cocaine slinging on corners when people be stopping and doing all that. Someone have a gun in their waistband.
Yeah.
Right? You're possessing a firearm. You're committing a delivery of
Or people were robbing people.
felony
with
firearm,
guns.
armed robbery. Right.
Michael, the felony firearm sentence also is served before the sentence for the underlying crime. For example, Michael Richardson, who had a felony firearm, is no longer serving time for that. That time is served first. So now Michael Richardson is serving time just for the marijuana.
Thompson.
I'm sorry, Thompson. Michael Thompson is serving
Kramer.
time.
You're thinking of Kramer.
Well, regardless, the guy was in there for 30 years. I don't remember his name. He had a felony firearm and he had like 3 pounds of marijuana.
Right. He got
So
sentenced.
he's already done the time for the felony firearm, and now he's just doing the time for the marijuana. That's the way it works. They make him serve the time for the gun first.
Right. There you go. So there you go. So that's the problem with felony firearm. And a marijuana case alone versus a marijuana case in a firearm, felony firearm is... Now, I would say this. What I think is also an important point moving forward is that if the state of Michigan intended to make it no longer a felony for cannabis, it would follow that you can no longer be charged with felony firearm ever in your marijuana behavior, right? Under
Right.
state law. I mean, federal law is off, but I'm saying
Under state law, there's only one instance when that could occur, and that is if the behavior is willful, habitual, and for a commercial purpose or involves violence. Then you're punching through the public health code. Then you're going to catch a felony firearm.
and I say out loud that the point that I'm making is if the intention is to make it a civil infraction, I don't know how you can make out with a straight face a argument that someone should be charged with felony firearm when the underlying felony
Right.
is a civil infraction or intended to be.
Yeah.
And by doing so, if someone has a gun, does that not make the element of violence, right? Like you're allowed to drive around with 2.5.
I mean, the police are going to say it does.
Of course they
but
will.
we all know that's not the case. I mean, if simply possessing a weapon isn't violent. So that's a bullshit argument. Now, if they're waving the pistol around, then you got a problem. But simply possessing it is not reason for that.
Well, it's going to be an interesting road. I this is. I think a lot of this could be avoided with some leadership issues. I mean, I don't know that the.
Well, we can start by decriminalizing marijuana, and that is what we were promised during this campaign.
It's been legalized.
No, I mean federally.
Oh, that's not happening.
I know. I mean, I'm not naive, but it was tossed around quite a bit, and that would be a big step in helping to take care of some of these issues with the federal government.
All right, so all right, so it's the gun issue covered. Check.
Yeah,
All right.
so it's legal under state, not legal under federal law. So if you go to a firearm dealer, they're going to ask you, and you have to fill out the form, and you have to tell the truth.
Jim,
Well,
speak up.
He said you got to fill out the form. You got to tell the
You
truth.
got to fill out the form, Alan, and you got to tell the truth.
But you define what the
Thank
truth
you.
is. You define
it's-
the truth.
Yeah, I'm not here to tell you
gotta
what
be
the
able to
truth
defend
is.
it.
Just don't perjure yourself on a federal form.